Today is Saturday, April 9th. How often do you use swear words? If they've become a more regular part of your vocabulary, you're not alone. Research shows Americans have been cursing more often since the onset of the pandemic. And a lot of you had something to say about this on Instagram when we posted about it a while back. So we're digging in a little more. Today, we're speaking with two experts about this trend. We'll get into the history of curse words and where they get their power a bit later. But first, we have author and executive coach May Busch. She spent 24 years in the investment banking world and is now a go-to advisor on things like career advancement and how to better communicate in the workplace. She explains when it's okay, even encouraged, to use curse words at work and when to avoid it. Plus, her tips for how to navigate workplace conversations in general, including what to say to your boss that could land you a promotion or a raise. And don't worry, there are not any curse words actually said until the second half of this episode. We'll warn you first. Welcome to the Newsworthy Special Edition Saturday, when we sit down with a different expert or celebrity every Saturday to talk about something in the news. Don't forget to tune in every Monday through Friday for our regular episodes, where we provide all the day's news in 10 minutes. I'm Erica Mandy. It's now time for today's Special Edition Saturday. May, thank you so much for coming on the Newsworthy.
It is my pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to this, Erica.
I want to first ask your opinion about whether or not it's acceptable to curse in a professional setting.
The answer is it depends. Culturally, is it something that is acceptable, or are you likely to possibly offend somebody without meaning to? Then you want to look at the context. Are you in a client meeting? Then you probably don't want to be cursing unless it's a client who likes to curse. Or maybe you're in the coffee area and maybe everybody else is just sort of slinging around. So maybe that's okay. So I sat on the trading floor for quite a number of years. And I also was in the banking area for a number of years. And so on the trading floor, if you didn't curse now and again and do it with authority, then you were a little bit strange. Whereas if you were the banking floor, then most people didn't curse. So there's really that kind of norm or context that you have to be aware of. And I just remember one time when I was so mad that I let loose with a really choice set of phrases that I will not repeat here. But that upped the level of respect that I had for my colleagues on the trading floor immeasurably. So sometimes it makes sense to let some of it out.
Some data out there has indicated that people have been swearing more often since the pandemic started, including in front of coworkers over Zoom, let's say. Do you see that trend in your own work? And what do you make of it?
You have to be really careful about how far you extend that casualness, because work is still work. We want to be professional. We want to get promoted. We want to advance. We want to impress our clients. And it is still socially not the norm to start using a lot of curse words all the time. We all slip. We all make mistakes. And that makes us human. But it's really a question of degree. So if it becomes a habit, then you're really on the slippery slope, because once it becomes a habit, you don't even notice that you're saying things, sort of like the word like. So when you're listening to somebody speaking, like that can really be distracting to the audience. And there are people who view curses as verbal violence and just don't like to hear it and can be offended. So it can be a career limiting type of move if it goes to that degree.
Do you think there's a difference between in person or, say, a Zoom call versus emails, text messages, social media?
I look at things in writing as being more formal than things that are said, because things that are said in passing, you can go and correct that if you notice that a colleague is offended by a swear word that you may have used. And whereas in writing, it's there, you don't really see the impact it's having on somebody else.
Let's move beyond curse words and talk about some other, casual versus formal situations at work. So when talking to coworkers or even managers, your bosses, how should people know when it's okay to be more casual in general versus adopt that more formal tone and behavior?
You want to gauge your communication so that it lands with the other person. And you're needing to therefore be able to read the room, read the other person, and understand what would be appropriate. So one thing I noticed when I got transferred to London is that Americans are much more casual in the way we communicate than my British colleagues were. So I had to make adjustments because I might come across as too casual or even rude in some cases. In some cultures, I would go and say, "Oh, hello, Hans," but everybody else called him Herr Doctor, whatever. In Germany, it was much more formal. I think it's really very context dependent, and you just want to read how the other person wants to be communicated with. And I always like to say, let them go first if you're not sure.
Well, speaking of names, let's say you're reaching out in an email to someone for the first time. Is it okay to use a first name?
I do, and it depends again. I also do some work as a senior advisor at Arizona State University. And there I have learned that when you're a staff person and not a faculty member, then you're safest to address the faculty member as Professor so-and-so or Dr. so-and-so. One thing I do, even though I use first names, if I'm writing to somebody for the first time, I will tend to use Dear Erica instead of Hi Erica, unless I know that that person has already written to me as hi or hello. I find that that first word I use before the name is actually more likely to change for me than using first name versus last name.
I know that you've talked about the importance of informal conversations with your bosses in order to be seen as someone who could also take a senior role or get a promotion. Can you talk about that and maybe some tips for people if they struggle with how to have informal conversations here in the US with their bosses?
Before you go in to talk to your boss, you want to just self-manage so that you get yourself into a really calm place. You and your boss, you're going to talk regularly. So why not just make it part of the norm? Don't think of it as going in to ask for a raise or ask for a promotion or make your boss give you XYZ, whatever it is you're looking for. It's just a conversation. And there's a lot you can do with scripting. We can't go through all the exact scripts here, but what I do with my clients is we go through and say, all right, well, what is it that you really want to accomplish in this conversation? And what would be a win? What kind of questions can you anticipate from them and have some prepared answers? Because when you feel prepared, you also can be a little bit more relaxed.
And what about when the boss just asks you, hey, how's it going?
So that's a great opportunity for you to use what I call your dance card. You can just have pre-written down, or it could be digital, the 3 points that you want to get across, so that you're just prepared. So when your boss says, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? You don't just talk about the weather. You can say, yeah, everything is great. There's this one deal that I just feel like the team knocked the cover off the ball with this one. And, I'm sure you'll want to tell everybody else about it, but here's blah, blah, blah. That way you can be sharing something, an accomplishment, without sounding like you're bragging because your boss asked you what was going on.
Still ahead, why are some words considered taboo in the first place? We're speaking with the man who wrote the book on profanity, Michael Adams. He's a linguist and English professor at Indiana University. He explains how cursing has evolved over time, why certain 4-letter words hold special power, and how cursing can even help you endure pain. But first, let's take a quick break to thank our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by ZocDoc. There are some amazing doctors out there, but really the only ones that matter are the ones who actually take your insurance. With ZocDoc, you can focus on doctors who are in-network, putting you on the path to see the doctors who are right for you. ZocDoc is a free app that shows you doctors who are patient-reviewed, take your insurance, and are available when you need them. Go to ZocDoc.com, choose a time slot, and whether you want to see the doctor in person or do a video visit, and just like that, you're booked. No more wasting a bunch of time searching online, calling doctors' offices, or asking everyone you know for a recommendation. I've had that experience where I thought I got a great doctor recommendation only to find out they don't take my insurance and I was back at square one. With ZocDoc, I know all the options on the list are in-network. Go to ZocDoc.com/newsworthy and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then start your search for a top-rated doctor today. Many are available within 24 hours. That's ZocDoc.com/newsworthy, ZocDoc.com/newsworthy. This episode is also brought to you by KiwiCo. As a parent, it can be hard to find creative ways to keep your children busy and challenged. Well, KiwiCo helps make it so much easier. And especially with spring arriving, there's a new energy in the air that encourages kids to connect with the world around them, and KiwiCo's monthly science and art projects celebrate that. It's the kind of thing that can lead to a lifelong love of learning. It's always so fun to get our KiwiCo crate. Of course, Dax loves it, and I love seeing him get so excited and engaged with something new. For older kids, they'll get projects that will help them discover things like the science of magic and the engineering of a domino machine and the chemistry of cooking and so much more. So step into spring and celebrate the season of discovery with a KiwiCo subscription. There's no commitment, so you can pause or cancel anytime. And right now, the Newsworthy listeners can get 30% off your first month plus free shipping on any crate line with the code Newsworthy at KiwiCo.com. That's 30% off your first month at KIWICO, KiwiCo.com with the promo code Newsworthy. Okay, now to my conversation with author Michael Adams. But first, here's your heads up. This next part of the interview does include a bit of profanity near the end. Michael, thank you for coming on the Newsworthy.
It's a real pleasure.
How do certain words get labeled as profane? Why is it taboo to use certain four-letter words in the first place?
Historically, it comes out of the sense that you can't take God's name in vain, at least within the Western Christian world. So what counted as profanity in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance isn't what we call profanity today. It was more like zoons for God's wounds. It's not nearly as ear-catching, at least for us, as some of the stuff we say today. There's this prohibition that comes up in the 16th and 17th centuries in Europe and America against sex, and there's a dislike of excrement and stuff like that.
So how has that changed over time? Some recent reports say people are cursing more since the pandemic specifically. Why is that?
That's an interesting proposition, and I don't know that it's exactly true. I mean, I can understand conditions that would make it true. Anybody who's worked at home during the pandemic, as I have had to do, has certainly wandered around the house swearing to himself, in this case, about, whatever problems occur in work. And we're safe to do that here because we're not in the office anymore. I think, too, sometimes we use profanity to form bonds of intimacy with people. We like to take a little risk and see if other people will risk being inappropriate with us. And when you're not seeing people as much face to face, I can see how those conditions would lead to more use of profanity. I always ask the question, in addition, who's doing the swearing? And I've thought about this a lot. Is it the essential workers that swear more, or is it the people who are lucky enough to be working at home and have the freedom to do that in the way that some other people don't? Some people's profane utterances may have increased in volume over the pandemic period, but maybe not everybody's.
I know you have said the pandemic created a perfect swearing storm. What did you mean by that?
I think the register of our speech is less formal because all of our activities are less formal, and some of the parallels are obvious. You're talking to your boss on the phone or over Zoom or something, and you look pretty good from the neck up, but the truth is you're wearing sweatpants.
What about the impact of stress or sickness? Research has shown that cursing may help people with physical pain. What does that research show, and what's the link there?
If you're in a stressful situation, especially a physically stressful situation, and you swear, you release some of that stress or tension. And a famous one of these experiments was at the University of Bristol, and they had a bunch of participants stick their hands into buckets of ice water and hold the hands in the water as long as they could. And what the experiment showed in the end was that people who swore were able to keep their hands in the ice water longer than people who didn't swear. You were able to last longer, endure the stress or the pain better, if you could release some of the stress along the way, which when you think about it makes sense. And there's evidence that that's true for emotional stress too. Profanity is the language we use when we are stressed to the point that no other language works to express what we feel.
Would you say there's any other pros or cons to swear words that you want to mention?
The obvious distinction that you always have to take into account is that there's a difference between swearing with somebody and swearing at someone. There are people, psychologists, child psychologists, I've heard say that swearing is always aggressive or damaging language. And I don't think that's true. But if you're hurling curse words at someone else, if that's the purpose you use them for, you could very well injure somebody, and it's not the right type of behavior.
What do you think gives these words their power? And if we use them too often, do they lose their edge?
Swearing is probably hardwired in the brain, and we know there's reason to exercise restraint in using it. We're unlikely to just swear all of the time, because if we did, then those words would lose their taboo status. We'd never be able to say, well, now that's a bad word. Just having a little bit of taboo attached to the words, that they're not for totally polite conversation, allows us to use them effectively. It also gives us a reason to be cautious about using them too much.
Is there anything about the actual words or maybe the sound of the words that give them extra power or extra meaning?
We have managed to pick some really fantastic words as swear words. The F word, or fuck, is a great word because there's a type of pressure that you're putting into the word at the beginning in that sound. The sound hurtles across the vowel, and then it ends up slamming against that k at the end of the word. That makes it a very impressive and useful word, really, if you're trying to express frustration. Saying the F word is very much like giving someone the finger or some other obscene gesture, right? That's what it comes down to. I guess I think that we have kind of artfully come to conclude that a set of words like the F word, shit, the C word, things like that, really because of the way they start and end, are very, very effective in expressing frustration or disbelief or wonder in some instances. They're very versatile in a sense, even though it's a very narrow set of words.
Anything else you want to add, or just a final thought?
Every day, people are using profanity like other types of slang, because I consider profanity to be kind of hyper-expressive slang most of the time. I mean, we're being exceptionally creative and inventive with it, and that's part of the human story, that we can do that and that we're good at it and that we live in the language we speak.
Well, thank you to both of our guests today. For more from May Busch and Michael Adams, check out the links in our episode notes. And of course, be sure to tune in for our regular episodes. We bring you the day's news in our 10-minute roundups every weekday. We'll be back on Monday. Until then, have a great weekend.